Welcome back to the AI Corner. I'm stoked to have Carin Hercock here with me. Carin is the country manager for Ipsos New Zealand. And for those who aren't familiar, Ipsos is one of the world's best known market research and insights firms, helping organizations understand people, markets, and society through the data that they collect and through the ways that they deliver that information so people can make better decisions. Now, Ipsos released a really interesting study, which is called the AI Monitor. Basically, they look across the globe to understand how do different countries perceive AI, for that matter. And so there are some really interesting insights that have come out of the study in quite a consistent way, I would say, for New Zealand in terms of how we view the potential of AI and where there might be some nervousness or lack of trust, perhaps. So today we're going to dig into the data and some of the reasons behind some of these statistics from the report that was released in June from Ipsos. So, welcome to the podcast, Carin.
Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Why don't we start off by just understanding at a first point, how was this data collected? Who is it representative of? Can you give us some numbers from behind the scenes as to what the sample size represents?
Yeah, sure. So this was a study that was run across 32 countries across the globe, New Zealand being one of them. In New Zealand, the sample size was 1,000 and it's representative of all New Zealanders aged 18 plus. And what we do is we compare the results that we get in New Zealand compared to what we call a global average, which is the average of the 32 countries that we measure, as well as individual countries around the world.
Awesome. And the data tells us pretty clearly that Kiwis come out as one of the most nervous populations in the world this year with regards to AI. I think 65% of the sample size said they're nervous, only 40% were excited, and yet 72% of the sample say that they understand AI really well. There's some mixed signals in there in some way, shape, or form. What's your read? If you were to describe New Zealand's relationship with AI, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think I described it as skeptically optimistic. A lot of New Zealanders are claim to have an understanding of AI, and it's almost like if you look at the sort of trend at the data, that understanding has grown, but the levels of excitement about AI have declined or plateaued. And it's almost like the more that they understand about AI, the less excited they get about it. So that nervousness is increasingly growing.
It's fascinating. We build with AI all the time for clients. And the way I would look at it is that the more you understand about AI, you realize that it is, of course, powerful, but also very difficult to make work in certain environments. I find that a really interesting kind of dichotomy in some way that the more people understand and the more difficult you realize it is to use, that also the nervousness increases.
Yeah, I think it's more to do with if you look at some of the results, if you look at individual reflection. So we see a lot of people are using AI and it's saving them time
Mm.
at work. But I think that increased understanding and nervousness relationship could actually come down to people understanding the power of AI. And with all power, it can be used for good and it can also be used for evil. And I think that is potentially where the nervousness comes from. But also, we have seen that people don't necessarily trust all the data that they get out of AI or the results they get from AI. So they're spending a lot of time checking AI outputs.
But it's a healthy skepticism as well, which I'm sure
Yeah,
data
yeah.
points that we can point to that. But as you say, I think 57% of Kiwis say it saved them time this year, but they also believe it'll make the job market worse, and only 20% think it'll help the economy. That in itself, again, is just an interesting kind of intersection of it's saving me time, it's going to make the job market worse, but the economy is going to continue to deteriorate as well because of it. It seems quite a pessimistic view of the world considering the tool can benefit us personally, which people seem to recognize.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of messaging out there that's creating this kind of uncertainty around AI because people are using it at work. It's saving them time. But
Mm.
then we're also hearing a lot of messaging. You hear about some of the big consultancies who are saying they're not going to bring on graduates because they don't need them because of AI. We hear our own government saying that there's going to be significant redundancies made in government because they're going to be able to use AI to replace people. And if you think about that, replacing people means less people working, unemployment rates increase. That's not good for the economy because there's less tax take, there's less people with discretionary spending. If you follow through some of the positioning around AI is all about reducing payroll and reducing cost in business, rather than AI making people's jobs better, easier, more efficient, more creative. It actually is quite a negative consequence that you're talking to people about.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a view of the world, right? That it's
Mm,
some game, and that we only need a certain amount of people to do the jobs, and if AI can help us do that same output with less people, then we should see a reduction, and that makes total sense. I think the other side of that narrative that gets missed within, I would say, 90% of mainstream headlines and the narratives that come out of we're going to get rid of certain parts of the economy or certain jobs misses the fact that there are a lot of growth opportunities, which means we still will need more people. I
mm,
fairly err on the side of optimism with this rather than the latter. And I think that's where there's a missing piece around education in terms of a national strategy around it. And of course, we want to let the private market do what the private market does well, but having a more cohesive approach at the top level around literacy, awareness, adoption, and understanding of the opportunities, not just the negatives, which the headlines don't necessarily always support. I think we're going to see hopefully a better outcome and a more positive narrative around it.
mm. Mm. Yeah, we certainly see that where I am at Ipsos. I hear a lot of my senior people talk about the fact that actually AI is helping them do their job better and to a higher quality, and our outputs are better because of AI. And that actually instills lots of sense of pride and enthusiasm and more creativity. So I think, yeah, I agree that, but I do think that there is a role for employers and government to really frame AI up in a more positive way.
It's a leadership
Mm.
failure in my mind if there is
Yeah.
a belief amongst an organization or a societal cohort that fundamentally thinks that this is only negative or only a pessimistic outcome.
Yeah.
And we know that there's going to be a large volume of reskilling required for certain tasks of people's jobs. That doesn't necessarily mean that the job goes away. It just means that certain parts of their job, which fundamentally the tasks that AI helps me with, I'm very happy to offload that and I can focus more on the stuff that I enjoy and there's more intellectually
Yeah.
challenging as well.
Yeah. We try and focus on AI, getting rid of the jobs that people don't like doing, really, and the real sort of grunt work, and allowing our people to think smarter and be more creative. And
Get rid of the toil, isn't it?
mm, mhm.
The data points are really interesting. It makes sense in some way, right? The scatter puts New Zealand firmly in the kind of the center of an Anglosphere cluster with Canada, the US, Britain, and Australia, and a long way away from a lot of the more excited markets like Asia and Latin America. What do you make of that? What insights can you draw about the fact that countries like ours, we're more nervous about it? And how does that sort of differ even within that cluster of Anglosphere countries? How do we differ compared to Canada and Australia?
Yeah, what we've seen is that there's a strong correlation between those countries, a direct relationship with the potential of AI to drive economic growth. So that there are more growth opportunities in some of those markets, especially around Southeast Asia and that kind of thing. So the return on AI investment is probably going to be greater. I also think there could be a demographic nature to that responses. So we know that younger people tend to have more positive reactions to AI, and the Anglosphere countries tend to have an older or an aging population base. So there could be a little bit around that as well.
Yeah, very interesting. And does that same narrative show up in our data? If you can recall off the top of your head, do the younger respondents in New Zealand also look more favorably upon AI compared to, say, the older?
We haven't actually dug down into that into New Zealand.
I'm comparing it to there have been some stories in the news. I forget which program it was running. Maybe it was Seven Sharp or the news, and
Mm,
they were interviewing high school students, and basically ChatGPT was interviewing them and getting some feedback, and they all most of them came out on the side of I'm more nervous and I'm more afraid of the technology, and there seems to be there's obviously going to be a younger demographic who are very enthusiastic, then there'll be a
mm.
demographic that are very nervous and scared because that's potentially the workforce that they were hoping to join, that rug's potentially being pulled out. So I agree. I think markets where there's a lot more growth, they don't need as much in the way of technological kind of transformation to harness the technology because in the same way that some continents across the world were able to leap forward with the likes of mobile because they didn't have legacy infrastructure to
Yeah,
manage.
that's right.
I'd imagine
Mm,
in Asia and Latin America, they can move more quickly to adopt and there's less cleanup required. Whereas in our world, where we've had technology for probably slightly longer and it's more mature, also brings a lot of technical debt, unstructured and untidy data, old habits, as you say. And do you believe there's anything in the New Zealand compared to Canada or Australia? Have you looked much into the numbers of how we differ to those markets?
We've definitely seen Canada and Britain and the US have greater levels of decline in the sentiment around excitement. So they've actually gone backwards in some of those markets, whereas New Zealand has plateaued. And it's also interesting to look at those countries because trust in AI is really low as well. So it indicates that the more they know isn't increasing excitement or trust, which is what we're seeing generally. Yeah, so one of the things New Zealanders report that AI is more likely to have saved them work than in time at work than those countries. So it could be that New Zealanders are actually seeing some of the benefits of AI more quickly than those other markets. But in those other markets, their levels of trust have decreased quite a bit.
Very interesting. You may or may not have seen recently Anthropic released their latest economic index data, which basically looks at Claude usage across all the markets. And New Zealand ranks number five in terms of usage across 121 countries. Australia, number one. I think our usage compared to what was expected is about five times the volume of what we should have expected to use. And some of the most common topics of usage across the top five countries, including New Zealand, are the likes of homework, promotional writing, workplace writing, which tells me
Mm,
we're writing our copy for emails and all that sort of stuff. And you
mm,
start to translate that to some of the insights from the Ipsos piece around we are seeing potentially more value out of this from some of these other countries, whilst being nervous, but still we're at the top of the tree for usage. And
mm.
so you draw a circle around the fact that high users, lowest levels of trust as well. There's just a really interesting sort of spread and picture that we're getting across all of these data sets.
Yeah, and I think potentially it's just for some people it's moving so quickly. And there are those people who, what I've certainly noticed here is that the people that use it the most and are the real super users are also the most enthusiastic users. There's a real snowballing effect, and there are others who are being left behind, and they tend to be the people who are a little bit more anxious. And for some people, it's getting in there and giving it a go and just trying prompts and refining prompts. And the more that you do it, the better you get and the better outputs you get. So, yeah, I think it's potentially there's a sense from some people that they're being left behind a little bit with AI and they're not sure how to catch up because it is evolving so quickly.
I think you're right. It's overwhelm, and with overwhelm breeds fatigue, which I think
Mm,
what we've seen
mm,
in some of the data around how excited are people these days with it. One of the stats I did find really interesting was around only 21% of New Zealanders trust AI tools enough not to double check their outputs. Now, I find that a really interesting stat because I would never suggest to somebody that they should not double check their outputs from AI.
mm.
You always do that no matter how good the models get. Not only from the fact that you can't trust everything that comes from AI, but also you can probably learn something from the way AI has either mirrored your behavior or come up with a different idea that you may not have thought of, which obviously is going to help your own capability development. But as a research organization, does this high level of skepticism for our inability to just accept outputs, do you think that hinders our productivity, or do you think that's actually a sign of, I would call it, healthy digital or AI literacy?
Yeah, I just think it's a reflection of reality because people often, when they start using AI, they start playing with things. There's that classic kind of the spelling of words or how many letters are in a certain word to test it and trick it. And I just think that people know that often their first prompt doesn't get them exactly what they want. And so you get into that behavior of kind of checking and refining to get what you need. And you certainly, you do I think everyone's first experience is giving it a little test, seeing if it knows something that you know to be correct. And it most often does not get that right because it's not something that's based on a large language model kind of because it's something that you know personally or you know what I mean. I just think that there's a bit of it's part of the nature of it. And I think that it's fine that people are checking. I mean, we always talk at Ipsos about the importance of AI and HI working together. So you've got to have human intelligence to make AI really work for you, and that you've got to make sure that you ask good questions and prompts, get really great outputs from it. And also, you need human intelligence to really look at those responses that you get and shape them into something that's going to be valuable or useful.
Bang on as well, I think, with your comment on legacy behavior. If we use the
Mm,
earlier models and got the wrong output, or it told us the number was four and should have been five, it creates an element of skepticism or distrust where you constantly go through the process of validating or double checking.
mm,
And then there's
mm.
that moment when the model improves or your capability improves, and you realize I don't need to double check that anymore. And
Yeah.
but myself, I know I get super excited because I'm like, great, I can shortcut that process. For others, they probably go, oh
Mm,
no, that's another element of my intelligence or my knowledge that I don't need to focus on or think about as much anymore, which could mean a
yeah.
faster decaying of my knowledge on that topic. So it's a really interesting sort of statistic. And even looking at the data, the global average was 31%, I think I saw, for where individuals were likely to not double check their outputs. And we were very much at the in that kind of final grouping of folks who were
Mm,
skeptical enough of the outputs. And largely you saw a lot of European countries in the same boat as us, whereas the countries that were more willing to accept the outputs at first face value were more in the kind of South America, different parts of Asia as well. So again, that
mm.
geographical split is very pronounced.
Yeah, absolutely.
The environment, it's a hot topic in New Zealand always, and only 35% of Kiwis think that AI's benefits to society outweigh the environmental costs. And that's against
Mm,
a global average of about 49%. So we have
mm.
one of the lowest results anywhere. It's inherent, we care dearly about the environment in this country, but why do you think we are so much more environmentally skeptical of AI than most of the world who also have great environments that they should be looking after?
Yeah, I think New Zealanders do have a really strong relationship to the environment. It's something that's fundamentally important to us, and we often see we run a lot of research on New Zealanders' attitudes to climate change, and we're always amongst the highest in the world that really believe that individuals and businesses and governments should be taking action on climate change and that it's a critical need. And also, we have high levels of support for sustainable energy sources and all that kind of thing. And so I think the discussion around big data centers that require a lot of energy, they're contrary to that sentiment. And I think that's where it's come from. And New Zealanders are very protective of our beautiful environment. And so they're nervous that we're going to become home to a lot of data centers that start draining on that resource.
Hard to argue with that, really, is
Mm,
we will hear the stories about what's happening in the US with small towns being pillaged for their hydro and their water and other sources of energy, and in a country at the bottom of the globe where we don't have as many abundant sort of energy sources as others. We need to protect what's around us, and not only protect energy sources but also just protect the landscape, and that's such a massive industry for us in the tourism sector as well.
yeah, that's
And
right.
so
And the tourism sector is a much bigger employer than those data centers would ever be. So it is strategically, I can see why people are feeling that way.
it's interesting because I totally agree with the narrative. Obviously, tourism is bigger. We want to protect the environment. The counter to it is we're very skeptical about data going offshore or being processed
Mm,
offshore. And so
yeah.
there's a trade off there around if we want to have some sense of stronger ownership and knowledge of how our data is being tracked, processed, and some
Mm,
value of control, that we can have some more autonomy over that if we have those data centers locally. And you've got to wonder, is there a healthy balance, or do we, similar to previous technological revolutions, just become a taker of technology and just take what's given to us without any control of what happens
mm.
overseas?
Yeah, I think the data sovereignty issue is growing in importance. We're really conscious of that as a research company. So a lot of the data that we produce some really important data for government, and we take care not to send it offshore. And we are involved in things like patient experience surveys, and we have really strict data sovereignty rules around that data. So I think you make a really good point, but I don't think that New Zealanders are seeing seeing the link between those things. That's another kind of education messaging thing there.
Big time. Yeah, and it's evident in the data. I believe I saw 39% of respondents in New Zealand, only 39% trust companies to protect their data. And so our
Yeah.
data is being shipped overseas, used by advertisers. That's a worrying sign. So as you say, there's a big knowledge gap in the market for what it means if we were to make some of those considered trade-offs around data centers potentially locally and how we power them and generate a potential competitive advantage by the way that we can power those. It doesn't necessarily need to be through the means that have been attacked with overseas as well. In terms of comfort around data, Kiwis are fine with using AI to do online research, 64% or so, or taking a restaurant order was about 63%, but not screening job applicants or not diagnosing illnesses or writing the news or making political ads. Those numbers sat at around a 30 to 35% comfort level as well. How do you see Kiwis drawing the line, so to speak? The first two around doing online searches and taking a restaurant order, they're fairly transactional in nature. The other
Yeah.
four, jobs, illness, news, political, much more sensitive and they cut to the core. But is it as simple as that, or do you think there's more to it?
I think it is as simple to, it's the consequences of getting it wrong. It doesn't really matter if you use AI to get a restaurant review or whatever, it tells you where to go to dinner because you'll have a bad experience, you won't go back. But if you get a poor diagnosis or if you're unemployed, and there's a lot of discussion online about people who feel that they're great candidates for roles being blocked out by AI screeners, it's got a far bigger personal impact. And I think it does really ultimately come down to trust and trust in the performance and the accuracy. And I think if we can do more work about validating the outputs of AI and their accuracy in performing some of those much more high consequence tasks, then that could be overcome. But at the moment, people are nervous about that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done around disclosure, and 85% of Kiwis wanting AI disclosure to be more front and center as well.
Yeah, yeah.
We know that distrust in big tech and big organizations for that matter is on the decline and is probably not going to do a U-turn anytime soon until there perhaps is legislation or a shift in the moral compass of some of those organizations. But what was it from this year's New Zealand results that either genuinely surprised you or landed differently to what you had expected based on what you've seen previously?
I think that really surprised me, or actually it was across all the countries, was the kind of stability of the results over the last 3 years. I would have, if before I saw the report, I would have expected that excitement would have built, usage would have built, all the metrics would have skyrocketed because, especially when you look at what's happening in the financial markets around AI related companies, which have gone off the scale really in terms of value, whereas the sentiment of people has either plateaued or it's gone backwards. So there's really something fundamental about the human behavior and attitudes that is stopping the excitement really growing, and I think it's potentially a big issue. We've got to get past these hurdles, and I think if you look at it from a behavioral change perspective, we need to understand what it is that's motivating people, what capabilities that they need to actually make AI something that they perceive as valuable. I think there really has to be some work in that direction, and it could be that government have to, if they really want people to use AI to improve productivity, that there needs to be more in place to help New Zealanders feel prepared for it, capable of using it, protected, that their data is going to be safe when they use it. So I think there's a role for government, there's also a role for businesses and organisations as well. So as we talked about before, it is very much a leadership issue. At the moment, you would say that from the perspective of the people using it and the behaviour of those users, we seem to have stagnated a little bit and stalled. So, yeah, I would expect that to have significantly grown, but no, it hasn't.
It's a really interesting perspective, and I agree that the reassurance and education and leadership really, and those are all intertwined, sort of radiates through a couple of things. One, the work that we do, one of the number one reasons that businesses come to us for help with AI transformation is that in their businesses, we trained the team and gave them the tools, but nothing changed. And that's not an AI strategy, let alone is that the first step in my mind for how a business should transform. But lo and behold, that's what we've been sold in terms of give your people the tools and they're easy to use and off you go. And so that's a real concern. And then on the other side of the fence with the AI Corner survey I ran recently, from about 4% of our audience responded, by far and away, the number one thing people wanted to see was what are the prompts, what are the playbooks, what are the workflows, what can I copy in my business so that it's going to have an impact for me. And that really tells me that we have a problem in New Zealand with focusing on the individual to be trained up on AI and they're going to become a superstar overnight. And that absolutely is one part of the strategy, is to make sure our people are trained and going in the right direction. But we're not thinking about the organization as a larger organism of lots of people doing lots of things. And that requires cross-functional alignment, better data, strong leadership from the top, clarity on where we're going, making sure we're looking at how our work is done across the business and rebuilding that with AI in mind, and not just leaving that to individuals to try and on a Monday figure out how to rebuild their job or the way work gets done. They're not KPI'd to do that, let alone do they have the knowledge and the skills to actually apply an AI lens to how work could happen moving forward. So I think we're doing our people a disservice by putting this kind of load on them for them to be the ones to shift the business. They play their role for sure, but businesses need to do more around the leadership piece, the resourcing behind it, and accepting some of the fact that this is not an overnight success or a silver bullet. This is just one technology in the arsenal to enable their business to be more efficient and more effective.
Said.
Some good points of view there from both of us. So I suppose to close this out, given where New Zealand is at the moment, there's as you say, pragmatic caution around it, rising familiarity, low institutional trust. Do you think we're going to see a big shift over the coming years? Do you think that we're in a trend at the moment? And do you think nervousness will continue to climb? What's your read on where we're going?
I think we're in a little bit of a trench rather than a trend, but I do think it will depend a lot on the social impact of AI. It is increasingly going to be used, and if it becomes a really useful tool for people and it helps grow the economy and it helps make business successful and it makes people's lives better, then I think you'll see increased positivity and excitement. But on the flip side, if it does turn into levels of unemployment and greater inequity, then it could go the other way. I'm an optimist like you, so I'd like to think it was the former and not the latter. And I think it probably will be. But I think change is always difficult, people, and this has been one of the biggest changes that we've seen in a long time. And it's changing fast. And I just think that makes people a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit nervous. And we've got to make sure that we're taking people along with us.
Well said. As you say, I think there'll be a strong realization that we're not all losing our jobs tomorrow, and that the problem isn't the technology, it's the humans that are steering it, or the lack of human action to make the technology work within our businesses. So be an interesting couple of years with the election ahead as well. But Carin, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today and for sharing your insights based on the data. How would you suggest if folks want to get in touch with you, on what particular topics would you like to be speaking with individuals about, and how can they best get in touch?
Happy for people to visit our website, which is ipsos.co.nz, and you can download the report if they want to see more details on that. And all our contact emails are on the website as well, so that's probably the best place to go.
Excellent. And I'll make sure to link the report as part of the show notes and
Great.
any information that we share about it. And thank you to all of our podcast listeners for tuning in today. Please do subscribe to the Spotify or YouTube channels to be notified of when the next podcast episode comes out. As I say, we are going to be continuing to interview more business leaders who are driving transformation in the AI space, building AI native companies, or doing great AI research in the same way that Carin and Ipsos are doing. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to you joining us next time.